recorded version in the website. And I think we're going to start. Amy, welcome. We're really glad and happy to have you here with us today. And Amy is going to give a talk called Softening Boundaries, Practicing Humility. And for those of you who don't know Amy, she's kind of a figure in the eco art world. And so I'm going to just introduce her. Amy Youngs is Associate Professor of Art at The Ohio State University in Columbus. As an artist, she creates biological art, interactive sculptures, and digital media works that explore interdependencies between technology, plants, and animals. Her practice-based research involves entanglements with the non-human, constructing ecosystems, and seeing through the eyes of machines. She has created installations that amplify the sounds and movements of living worms, indoor ecosystems that grow edible plants, a multi-channel interactive video sculpture for a science museum, and community-based participatory video, social media, and public webcam projects. Youngs has exhibited her works nationally and internationally at venues such as the Papa Museum in New Zealand, the Trondheim Electronic Arts Centre in Norway, the Biennale of Electronic Arts in Australia, Centro Andaluz de Arte Contemporáneo in Spain, and the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem. She has earned an individual artist grant from the Ohio Arts Council, contributed writing to interdisciplinary publications such as Leonardo, and the recent book Robots and Art, and her work has been profiled in books such as Art in Action, Nature, Creativity in Our Collective Future. She has lectured widely at venues such as the Australian Centre for the Moving Image in Melbourne, Australia, and the Walker Art Centre in Minneapolis. Born in Chico, California, she moved to San Francisco, where she received a Bachelor in Art from San Francisco State University. On fellowships, she attended the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and earned a Master in Fine Arts in 1999. In 2001, she joined the faculty at The Ohio State University, where she is currently working as an Associate Professor of Art, leading interdisciplinary grant projects and teaching courses in moving image, eco-art, and art and science. So again, welcome, Amy. We're really happy to have you here.
And Thank you for inviting me. Really appreciate the invitation and so excited that this kind of conference exists now. May it be the first of many to come. Thanks.
We hope so. We hope so. Let's see how it goes. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna share Amy's talk, and afterwards we will have this small Q&A session where we will have the chance to ask Amy whatever we want. I have some questions here prepared. So the rest of you, if you have any questions for Amy, just go to the chat and you can write it down here and I will ask Amy among all these questions. So let me just share the video here, the talk. And hope, oops, sorry, I'm gonna. Just a minute. And here we go. Enjoy Amy's talk.
My name is Amy Youngs, and I'm an artist who wants to help humans practice humility. I seek to make our entangled relationships with other species more visible, tangible, and respectful. Technology is often used in my work, even though it is sometimes thought to be a tool that sets humans apart from other species, and a method that we use for controlling and ruining our living world. And while it is often used in this way, I'm interested in experimenting with ways it can be used otherwise. I'm not talking about techno-solutionism, where we imagine that technology will save us and we can continue on mistreating our ecosystem business as usual. Instead, I explore questions such as, can art plus technology help us develop more complex relationships with our non-human kin? Can it assist us in the uncomfortable recognition of our human vulnerabilities? Can we use it as a tool that reminds us to practice more respectful, dare I say humble, ways of interacting with the non-human world, which we are a part of? The fact that humans are totally reliant upon the multi-species world is clear and scientifically known. Food, oxygen, and waste processing all come from our non-human kin. However obvious this fact may seem, it becomes hidden in a culture where food magically appears in grocery stores, air is scrubbed by machine purifiers, and our waste disappears into trash bins that magically empty. In this handshake with composting worms, I wanted to feel vulnerable and to recognize myself as being part of an ecosystem that includes worms, mites, bacteria, fungi, people, cameras, internet, and dirt. A handshake is a ritual of greeting, an acknowledgement of equality, a sealing of an agreement, and a demonstration of respect. I held the worms in my hand and felt the gentle movement of their fleshy, moist bodies, fed by the waste generated from my own household. These worms are part of a colony of worms that have been with me for more than 20 years. We've lived together in California, Chicago, and now Columbus, Ohio. Living with worms reminds me of the blurry boundaries between food and waste, dirty and clean, decay and renewal. It reminds me that my human life is not possible without the work that they do in association with their entangled, symbiotic community. Wishing to share these experiences with others, I've made ecosystem-based artworks that offer boundary-softening experiences for them. In Digestive Table, people can eat with composting worms who live in the fabric bag under the table. They can feed leftover food to the worms and watch them on an infrared surveillance camera built into the table. Rich compost is harvested from the bottom of the bag and can be fed to the plants. I believe everyone should cohabitate with worms, as they remind us of the importance of nutrient cycling and the nearly invisible laborers who do this so elegantly. Our human systems are quite crude in comparison. We typically put food waste into landfills, which creates a huge problem because it degrades into one of the largest sources of methane gas emission. Methane is a greenhouse gas like CO2, but it's even more harmful to the atmosphere. Keeping composting worms as part of your own domestic waste processing means you're keeping methane out of the atmosphere. If you're thinking to yourself that a composting table might cause unpleasant odors, well, you're not thinking like a worm, you're thinking like a human. Let's consider instead the world of the worms. They actually eat the bacteria that cause the odors of rot to arise from the decaying food. There are no unpleasantries here. As a method of learning from non-humans and attempting to understand how I might fit into different types of roles, I've been creating installations that place the human as one actor among many. River Construct is a simplified river system, recreated indoors with plants, worms, solar power, a rabbit, and human helpers. The rabbit, named River Eddy, provided nutrients that would be swept up by humans and fed to the worms. Each player in the system had a programmed yet flexible, fuzzy role. Was River Eddy a manure producer, a pet, a show rabbit, or maybe food? During the exhibition, he did not always conform. He improvised, as living things do. His interest in human visitors didn't surprise me, but I could not have anticipated that he would treat his fenced area as a soft boundary. He would leap out and roam around with the humans visiting in the gallery, then leap back in to eat, sleep, and produce manure. The rabbit and the fence did not exactly work as programmed, but they worked far better than expected. These worms are in a hydroponic system without soil. Unlike most traditional hydroponics, this system does not require the addition of petrochemicals to fertilize the plants. Instead, the worms make the fertilizer for the plants. This experimental concept is called vermiponics. They're fed kitchen scraps and rabbit poop under a folded newspaper lid on top that keeps it dark in there for them. This is another soft boundary, as the worms do eventually eat that too. If you think worms would drown in a water-filled bucket, well, you're thinking like a human, not like a worm. It turns out water is not a boundary for them. As long as it is flowing, enough oxygen gets in and the worms can breathe just fine. The worm colony multiplied, the plants thrived, and so did the fruit flies. These uninvited guests of the ecosystem likely arrived when fruit scraps with the fly eggs were put into the worm buckets. The flies didn't affect the workings of the worms, the rabbit, the electronic control systems, or the plants, but they were the undoing of the system because of how they annoyed the humans. The gallery director couldn't tolerate the fruit flies, and he was unwilling to keep the experiment going. Perhaps these experiments could encourage us to stay with the trouble. Perhaps we need to relinquish our sense of control and our imagined mastery over the non-humans and the ecosystems. Perhaps we need humility. Humility comes from the Latin word humilis, which is low or lowly, and from the earth, since it derives from humus, earth. And while it is difficult for humans in the Western world to look at themselves with humility, one thing we know is we like to look at ourselves. Often, I use narcissism as a way to get humans interested in interacting with non-humans. First, our own egos are tickled by being on camera, and then we begin to feel good about who else is on camera with us. In this project, the Worm Selfie Booth, you get to hold worms and have your photo taken with them. The photo booth uses red light, which is invisible to worms and doesn't harm them. It also makes interesting photos where people are seeing themselves in the worm worlds from a lowly position in relation to the camera above. The camera automatically uploads the photos onto a social networking site as a way to insert these unseen compost workers into our world of images. This is a way to make worms visible and to begin to recognize their status as movers and shakers of the fertility of the earth. We lowly humans are lucky to get to be seen with them. Like any practice, the practice of human humility and turning one's attentiveness to non-human worlds is easier with guides. What reminds us to attend to soil or air or water? And how do we develop emotional loyalty to this earthly stuff? And what about those living creatures that process, move, make, and remake it? Paying attention to the non-humans reminds us that they're an important part of our community. We're kin, but it is easy to forget this when we don't experience them or interact with them on a regular basis. How do we know who's here, and how do we act and advocate in ways that are considerate for all involved? With a desire to be attentive to a specific place and its inhabitants, I did a residency at Flushing Meadows Corona Park in New York City. This resulted in 2 artworks that I designed as guides to focus attention on the non-humans there and as reminders of our shared vulnerabilities. This first project, Grasping Permeability, introduces people to the site through virtual reality. The experience is one of softened or permeable boundaries between human and non-human and between real and virtual.
Flushing Meadows Corona Park is a freshwater wetland in New York City, whose history includes layers of trash dumping, landfilling, water reengineering, and paving to accommodate 2 World's Fairs. Resting upon anthropogenic soil and ringed by auto expressways that add harmful effluents, this area around Willow Lake is undergoing restoration. A variety of birds, fungi, and plants live in this public park. Many of the species, such as Phragmites, are called invasive as they thrive due to the conditions fostered by human and machinic activities. After traveling to the site, I could see the effects of my own actions on the place as I saw the shimmering petroleum floating on the water. Creatures move through it anyway, like me, filtering it through our porous bodies. Grasping Permeability is a virtual reality installation that invites viewers to interact with images by grasping them with the controllers in hand. This spatial simulation is made from photographs I took on site. The experience is designed to alter the viewer's sense of self in relation to the hollow virtual skins, the surface representations of place. The ring of Phragmites plants provide a semi-permeable layer that can be touched by real and virtual hands.
The next project is a guide for people who are on site at Flushing Meadows Corona Park in New York. It's an app which functions similarly to a museum guide, except that it guides you as if you were a creature of the place, such as a tree, a muskrat, a bird, or a fungus. This is an augmented reality artwork that encourages people to explore and experience ecological networks present on the site. It includes mixed reality animations and storytelling as an overlay to the actual park. The experience is an embodied one designed to connect humans with the unseen worlds present in the park. Instead of inventing a fantasy story, it was important to me that it be rooted in the reality of the place. It's an eco-narrative based on firsthand knowledge of who's present on the site, plus scientific knowledge of them and ecological knowledge of their interactions. The human is woven into a part of the network of lively creatures who share symbiotic associations. It's time so that you land at a stopping point on the trail that relates to the creature you've become. When you're the cormorant, you're at the lake, diving underwater, chasing the fish, which you see animated on your screen. The menu is a map that shows you where each augmented reality scene takes place.
There are chemical messages being sent out from our neighbors. These emissions are swirling around and moving into the airspace. Plants may not be able to walk, but we can move beyond our plant body and control the creatures that move around us. Float ahead to where the path splits off. Look for birds. We are transforming into a yellow warbler, a bird that navigates all the way from Central America each spring to nest in this park. How do we do it? We can see magnetic fields.
Recent research shows that migrating birds can see magnetic fields, almost like a heads-up display, which is what augmented reality does for humans. We can't see magnetic fields, but the sensors in our phones can, so we can have the augmented bird view of the world simulated for us in our handheld devices. It is a bird view overlaid on our own, helping us understand and semi-experience what birds could do all along. This next scene shows how the app guides viewers as if they're an ant using pheromone trails.
When the pink trail appears on the ground ahead, tap it to lay down scent pheromones that will refresh the trail, so the ants coming along later will know that it is still a good one. Take a few steps ahead, then stop and tap again, then again. We want to be sure this trail is here for as long as this food source is, so we can go back for more. After tapping a few pheromones onto the ground, stop and look behind to see if they are there. Use the connection device like an antenna to read the trail we have written. Let's stow the device now and use our sensors to follow the trail ahead. We walk with our 6 super coordinated legs, able to speed.
At the end of each scene, users are instructed to put their phones away and pay attention, which is ironically the whole point of the app. My hope is that the embodied technologies can be used more creatively in ways that help us tune our attention to the expansive, more than human world that we live within. How else can we simply practice paying attention to what matters? This project began as an assignment I gave to my students in an art and science class. It required that they notice and document an encounter with one plant one time per day. As our ancestors, plants are more than just food, shelter, and oxygen producers. They have been intimately involved in shaping the human species. They arrived on Earth millions of years before us, and our bodies evolved to interact with them. Our eyes can detect the colors of the ripe fruits, our tongues can taste them, and our fingers are shaped to pluck, shuck, peel, weave, and plant them. Yet I know so little about their ways of being in our shared world. I began to observe them more closely, first by taking their photographs and sharing space and time with them. I then developed a regular practice I called plant noticing, which allows my eyes to be curious about them, my hands to be guided by the pleasure of their shapes and textures, and my cell phone to capture our time and the light together. I encourage you to practice plant noticing. Why? Because you can increase the sense of belonging in the living world, enjoy your pleasurable sensations, gain a sense of wonder and appreciation for life, exercise your perceptual skills and curiosity, cultivate gratitude, and widen your circle of non-human friends. Here's some tips on how to do it. Whenever you feel the urge to look at media on your phone, point it at a plant instead. See the plant through your camera and notice what you notice. Every day, take a minute to notice a plant. Practice doing it without your phone camera. Look for new plant friends indoors and out. I hope these simple actions can help us soften the perceived boundaries between ourselves and the non-human teachers who feed, clothe, and shelter us. And may we practice humility so that we can gain greater respect for and knowledge of our non-human kin who figured out how to live here on Earth for far longer than we have. Thank you.
Well, Amy, I don't know if you're still here with us. Connection troubles, maybe. I think my connection is low right now.
Hi. I think I'm
Can you
here.
hear me? Yeah. You're here. I can see you in the
I am
camera. I think
here.
the camera. Yeah, there you are.
Just took a
Can
minute.
you hear? Yeah. Can you hear me
Yes.
well?
Yes.
Good. Good. So now, if anyone wants to make a question to Amy, you can just write it in the chat here, and I will just ask the question here. But I have some questions prepared for Amy. So first one, it's really fascinating. Art pieces based on worms and how they live and what they do for us, and even how we should switch our minds when it comes to think of other species or organisms. All these works, which are art, but at the same time science and maybe even social experiments based on human society, worm societies, and human worms, animal, plants relationships. When you show these pieces, is all this information explained to the public? So does the public know they are part of what looks like an experiment?
Thank you. I do like to have text for my exhibits when I present them. I like people to know what's happening and what I'm trying to do, but that's not always possible. When I show in some places, they don't want to put didactic text. That's somehow sometimes how it works, but I guess I I think that it's great that people know that they're a part of an experiment. I think that's always the case. And I think that, you know, as an artist, I don't have to get institutional review board certification. I don't need to get any kinds of special qualifications to experiment on the public, which is kind of wonderful as an artist. And I think that's something scientists do have to do. And that gives it a kind of a freedom that I think that we should always use as artists to do experiments in playful ways that might not yield solid data, but more maybe affective data or qualitative data, interesting conversations we might have with people, new ways of thinking about things. So I like and again, maybe this is a soft boundary. It's kind of an experiment, but it's also kind of a play. Let's play with this idea together. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's nice that people know that. I don't want to be hidden about it.
I would have liked to see these fruit flies around the gallery. I think that should have been a really interesting art piece. I'm sorry that the gallery didn't like it. So I think it's really interesting, the concept of technology being something that keeps humans apart from nature, and the concept technosolutionism. It is very ironic how you use this technology in your work to get the public closer to nature. Have you noticed if younger audience is more interested in the use of this technology, or do you think this isn't a matter of age at all? Because in the piece River Construct, we can see a not at all digital installation, and we've seen a baby in the pictures, not young audience, just a toddler and some adults. So I was wondering if you think there is a priority or more interesting way of getting close to audiences depending on their age and the technology used.
Thank you. Yes, I think it is important that what technology does is it points at things that are important. So we don't put cameras on things that are not important. We put them on things that are important. So it brings things that we might not think of as important into adult importantness. And as kids, I think we already love a fuzzy rabbit. That's like easy for a kid. Like, of course we love rabbits and bugs, and there's like wonderful things about nature that we naturally love. We're biophilic creatures, but as adults, we're taught that that's child's play. And I'm often told when adults see my work, they always say things like, "Oh, I'll bet the kids like it," as if to say that they don't, because it's not okay for an adult to be interested in living things. It's like a child's play. And so I think what the technology does is it gives another level of importance that maybe an adult can actually have a little humility or something. They can be like, oh, well, technology is important, and so therefore I have some kind of interface that I can look at something differently now. So yeah, I think that's partly how I'm using it as interfaces for different kinds of age groups and audiences.
So it looks like it's something like kind of a translation to adult language when we use
Yeah,
these devices. Yeah. Thank you
I think so.
for your answer. So, and do you think this is the way we have to talk to new generations in order to make them be aware of the environmental crisis and things they will have to handle in their future adult life?
Yeah, I think they already know. I think that young people are already woken up to this. I teach college, and I think that it's maybe more in some ways I might be speaking to an older generation about what's important and to remember in the representations of nature that these are things that are important. I actually think that younger generations already know. So yeah.
I agree. I think they're more concerned on all this than adults are. So, and my last question, so I hope somebody here writes a question in the chat to make this more interesting, not just my questions. I like how you make it clear when you use the term humans in the Western world. Do you think this pandemic is making us see the world in other terms, maybe with more humility? Do you believe humans in the non-Western world may have experienced the pandemic in the level as we are experiencing it?
Yeah, I think that the pandemic and this tiny virus reminds us that we are very vulnerable as human species. We're vulnerable. We're not on top of the universe. We don't have it all figured out, and we have a lot to learn. I do think that I do often talk about my perspective coming from a Western. I'm in the United States. I'm white. I mean, there are a lot of things about my perspective that I understand uh, needs some humility, but I'm not really speaking to other cultures that I'm learning from, indigenous cultures and cultures that are not part of the Western world. I think already have a sense of humility towards understanding that they are a part of a vulnerable world of lively creatures, and so I don't feel like I'm speaking to them as much. I'm perhaps more learning from them. And I think that we're all learning from the pandemic in terms of having a sense of just an understanding that we need to work things out a little bit better. We need to be a bit more willing to be flexible and resilient and willing to change and willing to understand that our place is, and we imagine we're at the top of the evolutionary ladder when in fact we haven't really been here that long. And viruses have figured a lot out that we haven't. So yeah, I think it's a good time of humility for us. I hope.
I think so. I was thinking also about this concept that we were talking earlier before the session, that we used to be in the center and we are not. This concept that you are using in this worm selfie booth project, right? That you're making us be in the same level as the worms. So I think it's a really interesting concept that we are lucky to be in this picture with the worms. It's not that they're lucky to be with us, but we are lucky to be with them. So maybe we should rethink a little bit on our relation, not only with the rest of the organisms in our environment, but also with the rest of the humans in the world, not just taking care of the Western ones.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know if anyone wants to make a question to Amy. Is there anyone who is ready for that? I think you're all really shy.
Me too.
No questions at all? Come on. It's your only chance to ask Amy something. Okay, we're giving you 1 minute to think about it. So, Amy, I want to thank you again for being here, for your fascinating video, for your fascinating work. I think it's really inspiring. I hope it's inspiring not only artists, but also scientists, because your work is really in that line in between art and science. And I think we need more work like this and more experiments in art galleries and in the communities. And
thank you. Thank you.
So thank you very much.
I'm interested in. I'll be interested to hear the rest of the panels and the keynote coming up. I'm excited about.
We have
science and
Jennifer
ecology together.
Yeah. We have Jennifer Parker in about 10 minutes. We're starting with the opening session. We will have the vice rector and the dean of the School of Arts, and then we will have the keynote speaker, Jennifer Parker. So thank you again very much for being with us. It was a pleasure. My pleasure having you here. So thank you, everyone. And I hope to see you in 10 minutes.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.